She had everything a young actress could dream of. Millions of fans, a hit show, a face known in every living room in America. And then, at the exact moment most stars fight hardest to stay relevant, she walked away. No scandal, no meltdown, no tabloid explosion, just silence. And that silence is exactly what made people never stop asking one question: what actually happened to Nancy McKeon? Because here's the thing, stars who vanish after a crisis, we understand. We've seen that story 100 times. But a woman who leaves at the top, on her own terms, with nothing forcing her hand, that's rare. That's the kind of mystery that doesn't fade with time. It grows. For years, fans of a certain sitcom would ask each other the same thing. Where did she go? Why did she stop chasing the spotlight when the spotlight was practically begging her to stay? A rare interview here, a quiet photo there, and in between, nothing. Just enough to keep the curiosity alive, never enough to satisfy it. Today, that finally changes. Because the full picture of Nancy McKeon's life, the choices, the love, the heartbreak, and the quiet comeback is clearer now than it's ever been. And once you hear it, you'll understand this was never a story about disappearing. It was a story about choosing. Because most of what we think we know about fame comes from a handful of familiar patterns. The star who burns out. The star who gets canceled. The star who fades because the phone stopped ringing. We rarely get the version where someone simply decides, on her own terms, that enough is enough and means it. So stick with us. Because this one is going to surprise you, long before the fame, before the iconic role that would define a generation. Nancy McKeon was just a kid from a New York family where performing wasn't unusual, it was expected. And she wasn't the only child in that spotlight. Her brother, Philip, was right there with her. Together, they modeled, they auditioned, they learned how to smile for a camera before they'd even learned how to ride a bike without training wheels. It wasn't a normal childhood. It was casting calls instead of playgrounds, waiting rooms instead of recess, photographers directing them where to stand instead of teachers directing them where to sit. But that shared experience between brother and sister became something unbreakable, a bond that would later turn into her greatest joy, and eventually, her deepest grief. Not many people get to say their earliest memories are shared frame by frame with the one sibling who understood exactly what that strange, unusual upbringing felt like from the inside. Then came the role that changed everything. A tough, sharp-tongued girl from a working-class background, thrown into a boarding school full of privilege she didn't belong to. Leather jacket, motorcycle, attitude for days. But underneath all that armor was a girl who was loyal, wounded, and fighting to stay true to herself in a world that wasn't built for someone like her. Audiences didn't just watch that character. They saw themselves in her. She wasn't a character on a screen anymore, she became a friend, a role model, proof that being different wasn't something to hide. For a lot of young women watching at home, she was the first version of themselves they'd ever seen taken seriously on television, not the pretty sidekick, not the punchline, but the one with an actual spine. She stayed in that role for nearly a decade, long enough for the line between actress and character to blur completely in the public imagination. By the time the show wrapped, she wasn't just famous. She was part of a generation's memory, part of Wednesday nights, part of childhoods, and yet here's the part most people miss: she never wanted to be trapped inside that one image forever. While the show was still airing, and long after it ended, she kept chasing roles that had nothing to do with the tough girl from the Bronx. She played a female firefighter breaking into a department that didn't want her there. She played a young woman living with schizophrenia, a role that demanded a kind of emotional honesty most young stars wouldn't dare attempt. And in maybe her most powerful performance, she portrayed a real survivor of domestic violence, a case so significant it helped reshape how the law treated abuse. These weren't safe choices. These were the choices of someone who wanted to be taken seriously as an artist, not just remembered as a beloved face from television. Here's a detail that'll make you pause. She was reportedly considered for a role that would go on to make another actress one of the most famous women on television for a decade. Imagine an entirely different timeline where that casting had gone the other way. But it didn't. And what happened instead changed her life in a way no audition ever could. On the set of a small television film, she met a man who worked behind the camera, a cinematographer with zero interest in fame, zero desire to be recognized, zero patience for the spotlight. And for a woman who had spent her whole life being watched, that quiet, ordinary presence was exactly what she needed. They didn't rush. They took years to build something real before making it official. And when they finally did marry, it looked nothing like a Hollywood wedding. A tiny guest list. No red carpet. No photographers. Just the people who actually mattered to her. After that, she left Los Angeles behind and moved to a ranch, far from the noise of the industry. There, she raised 2 daughters, away from cameras, away from headlines, in a life that finally felt like it belonged to her instead of to the public. No stylists. No publicists. No one asking what she was wearing or who she was seen with. Just mornings that looked like anyone else's mornings, and a version of normal she'd never gotten to experience as a child. That, right there, is the answer to the question so many people spent decades asking. She didn't vanish because something went wrong. She left because something finally went right. But leaving the industry's spotlight didn't mean leaving the craft. Quietly, without any press push, she started directing. She stepped behind the camera on the very show she was starring in, then wrote and directed a short film entirely on her own. It was proof that she never just wanted to perform stories, she wanted to build them. Years later, once her daughters were a little older, she made a surprising return to television, playing the mother of a rising young star on a hit Disney sitcom. Think about that for a second. The actress who had once been the icon of one generation of teenagers was now playing mother to the icon of an entirely new one. It was a quiet, almost poetic full-circle moment that most viewers didn't even notice. And then came the moment nobody saw coming. In her 50s, she stepped onto a live television stage again, not as an actress hiding behind a script, but as herself, competing in one of the biggest reality competitions in the country. No character to disappear into. No lines to protect her. Just her, dancing in front of millions, being judged in real time. She didn't last long in the competition. But during the most emotional week of the show, the one where contestants share the story closest to their heart, she chose to dance in honor of her family. And when she was eliminated, she didn't seem devastated. She seemed at peace, like someone who'd rather leave on a beautiful moment than cling to one more week. Looking back, that dance floor was more than a competition. It was a woman stepping fully into her own name after decades of being known by characters, but almost immediately after that high point, life brought her the lowest one she'd ever face. First, she lost her father, the man who had introduced both her and her brother to this industry in the first place, who had sat beside them at their earliest auditions. Then, only a short while later, she lost her brother, her childhood partner, the person who had grown up beside her in waiting rooms and later stood behind the camera directing her. Gone, after a private illness the family never spoke about publicly. Try to sit with that for a second. Losing a father and then losing the one person who had shared her entire life since she was a small child, both within the same short stretch of time. Not 2 separate tragedies. One wave of grief crashing right into the next, with barely a breath in between. Most people get months, even years, to process one loss before the next arrives. She didn't get that luxury. She got one blow, and before she could even stand back up, she got the second. And here's the detail that quietly breaks your heart. Only weeks before losing her brother, she'd posted an old photo of the two of them, with a caption about getting through hard times together. Weeks later, he was gone. What did she do with all that pain? She didn't go on television to talk about it. She didn't sit down for a tell-all interview. In the middle of filming a holiday project with former co-stars, while quietly dealing with the hardest moment of her life, she kept working, choosing to honor her commitment instead of walking away, and every single year since. On her brother's birthday, she posts an old photo of him. Same quiet gesture, same simple tribute. No grand speeches, Just love, expressed the only way she's ever known how to express anything privately. Honestly, without needing an audience to witness it. Then, decades into a career that started when she was barely old enough to remember it, she did something she'd never done before. She stepped onto a New York stage for the very first time, performing in a play about two women connected for 50 years through nothing but letters, never once meeting face to face.